Michael Jackson dazzles people, mesmerizes people, hypnotizes people.
He's just so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I remember standing in the control room when we were doing the drums to Beat It with Jeff Porcaro, and I mean, what can you say? It was amazing.
Dancing.
He could be in the studio singing, and it could be the two of us.
Performer.
Or he could be on stage in front of 100,000 people, and there's no difference in the energy, there's no difference in the performance.
Unbelievable, nobody like him.
So every time he performs, it's that quality, it's that commitment to the music.
I think he was ahead of the world in moving somewhere very, very different.
Michael Jackson cuts a mysterious figure. His talents defy belief. He seems to hit impossible notes when he sings and to move his body in ways that challenge gravity when he dances. At the age of 6, he could express himself like a man of 60. And now in his mid-40s, he's still innovating, entertaining and awe-inspiring. There is no one else like him. Michael Joseph was the 7th of 9 children for Catherine and Joseph Jackson. He was born on August the 29th, 1958 in Gary, Indiana, into an extraordinarily talented family. Raised as Jehovah's Witnesses, the young children were coached by their ambitious father, and soon 5 of the boys, including Michael, had formed a family singing group.
He was in a whole another world when he's on stage. Even as a young kid, he was. You can tell that they followed him. Even at 6 and 7 years old, you could see them. You go to see them on the show. Michael was in charge.
The brothers were integral to the whole thing, and I'm sure teen girls of the day each had their own favorite Jackson. But you know, Michael. I don't think the spotlight could have gone on anybody but Michael Jackson, even at that point.
I remember one time they did a show at Beckman, and Michael was just, man, I knew right then and there. That little boy, he was, and he's younger than I am, but he was just doing things that a little boy is not supposed to do. You know, I mean, they were polished. Back in the 60s, I think most families, Joe Jackson, my father as well, all of them worked in the steel mill. The thing that Joe Jackson did was able to bring his family out of poverty and have them do something that they love to do. I take my hat off to him. He brought them out of a situation that almost everybody in Gary and in Chicago and Detroit region was going through.
They performed in all sorts of local shows, talent contests and schools, including one at Beckman High School where Jermaine was a pupil. By 1963, Michael, with his distinctive high vocals, was the lead singer of the family group.
Well, we did a show with the Jackson 5, and also, I said we went to the same school, so you pass them up and down the hallway. I didn't know who they were until they dropped their first 45. The name of it was A Big Boy, on an independent label called Steel Town. When that record was released on a local radio, you know, local around Chicago, Indiana area, everybody flocked and bought it. I mean, by the droves bought it.
After the success of Big Boy, the Jackson 5 were snapped up by Detroit's legendary record label Motown. Here they found themselves under the wing of Motown founder and president Berry Gordy.
The label had moved from being this really reliable, pop machine almost, cranking out hits, to a situation where we had artists like Marvin Gaye who were beginning to expand their horizons, and Stevie Wonder, who were getting away from the strict pop kind of thing. And it was clear that, you know, Motown was slowing down in that way. It wasn't there wasn't a top 10 hit every week anymore. And along comes the Jackson 5 and Berry Gordy with his magic touch.
So the Jackson family came to Motown at the perfect time.
First time I heard I Want You Back, I just loved it, and I just loved the sound of it. It had a sound that I had never heard before.
I knew they were going to make it. It would have been Motown or would have been somebody else, but they just had that oomph, and what really set them apart was the showmanship. At the age of 6 years old, Michael was doing splits and doing things that, doing the James, back in the day, you used to do the James Brown. It used to be a dance style of James Brown. You wiggle your feet, do like James Brown. He had it down. So yeah, I knew they were gonna make it.
Motown headquarters moved to California in 1969, so the Jackson family had to follow. Now based in Encino, California, the Jackson 5 faced a lot of criticism in those early days.
The critics all hated the Jacksons because they were bubblegum. There were a lot of protest songs going on, and they said that, because of the Vietnam War and all of the civil rights, and they said the Jacksons weren't relevant.
You're always on my mind, find another place to hide.
They weren't singing about war, they weren't singing about protest. They were singing about love. I Want You Back, Stop the Love You Say, ABC, Never Can Say Goodbye. Well, we've since discovered how relevant they became. They said they weren't going to last. So, once again, the critics were wrong.
Another brother, Randy, replaced Jermaine, and the Jackson 5 became the Jacksons, because Motown retained the copyright on the band name. Jermaine, who had recently married Berry Gordy's daughter, remained on the Motown label as a solo artist. Despite injecting new life into the label, the Jackson 5 Motown marriage was short-lived, and they soon signed a new deal with CBS offshoot Epic.
Well, as you recall, the war ended, I believe, in 74, 75. The troops, for the most part, pulled out of Vietnam. 75 was the year that the Jacksons left Motown, 75 or 76. And moved to CBS.
The move left the brothers free from the restrictions that came from carrying the Motown banner, and the real credibility began.
What was significant was to be able to freely write the songs that you want to write and to grow as songwriters. They didn't want to continue writing, back then we called it bubblegum. They didn't want to continue writing that. To me, it was just the second coming of the Jacksons. It was just a more mature Jackson. It was writing, producing, and you had a chance to hear and listen to what they wanted to do. And at that particular time, I think that's how Michael developed his skills as far as being a good songwriter and producer.
At this point, the world began to see the extent and depth of Michael's musical creativity.
I'd like to say thank you very much.
What Motown taught Michael Jackson is melody and the way rhythm works with melody in a pop format. He was a guy who, because of what Motown was groomed with a pop sense, and that's something that shone through on Thriller and all those big albums that he went on to make in the 80s and 90s.
I said you need to leave my dreams tonight.
The family were performing shows all over the world. Sam Brown was their musical director in the mid-70s.
Funny story. The first time I went out to the house, Michael always liked animals, and they had this macaw in the house, which I didn't know of. So I get, I buzz in, and the gates open up, and I go up this long driveway, drive up this long driveway, and I get out of my car, and I go to the back door, and I knock on the door, and I hear this voice say, "Who is it?" And I say, "This is Sam Brown. I'm here to see Joe and Michael." No response. So I knock again. "Who is it?" "Sam Brown. I'm here to see Joseph and Michael. You just buzzed me in." No response. Knock on the door again. "Who is it?" Well, it was the bird. And they were around the corner having a laugh. Michael and Jermaine and Jackie and Marlon were around the corner holding their noses to keep from laughing out loud.
The closeness of family, it gives you ability to know each other's voices 24/7, know who's going to do what. Any song you're singing, you're able to sing in harmony if you want to. Versus a group that's put together, a family group, they're more at ease on stage, number one, and more at ease at rehearsal. There's no ego.
Now tell me, what do you think is the success of the Jacksons, yourself and the Jacksons?
I would say probably togetherness, or just enjoying our work a lot. Putting a lot of love into it, all our efforts.
Wherever they went, the Jacksons were received by frenzied audiences who followed them relentlessly.
When we were in Caracas, Venezuela, and we were playing a soccer stadium that held 60,000 people, and we were downstairs in the dressing rooms, and the walls are concrete, with this lime green paint on the walls. All of a sudden, we heard this, oh, 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 oh. And it was the sound of the entire stadium stomping their feet because the opening act was finished and there was an intermission, and they wanted the Jacksons to come out, and it was scary. As we walked up the ramp, the closer we got, and you could hear the announcer, in Spanish, and saying, "Tito, Jermaine, Jackie." And then we were at the ramp, and Bill Bray was in front, who was their head bodyguard, security, and the band and I are back there, and he says, "The Jackson 5," and it was this huge roar from the crowd and screaming, and it was unbelievable.
Because I love it. You have to like it to be in it this long.
Yeah.
Or you go crazy. It's so much. We've been traveling the world and making records and just having a great time.
Michael always worked harder than his brothers. There was very little that could distract him. His one weakness, however, were amusement parks.
The boys, Jermaine, Jackie, Marlon, Tito, used to like to play basketball with the band members. They had a little basketball court. And Michael was always about working. It was time to work, Michael wanted to work. And he would often come to me and he'd say, "Sam, would you tell the boys to come on, let's go?" So then I'd have to go outside and say, "Okay guys, let's wrap it up." And then, of course they're going, "Okay, we just got 5 more minutes. We're almost through with this game." I was like, Michael wants to get started, guys, let's go. So Michael he didn't want to tell his brothers what to do because he was like almost the youngest. So he'd have me do it. Michael loves amusement parks. I think that goes without saying. Everybody knows that by now. And Michael would always ask if there was an amusement park nearby because he'd want to go. So we were in Caracas. One morning, there's a knock on my door, and it's Bill Bray, who is head of security. And he says, Michael wants to go to this amusement park, and nobody else wants to go. Everybody's sleeping and they don't want to go. And he said Michael said to ask you, he said, you might want to go because you like amusement parks. And I do. And I said, sure, I'll go with you guys. So it was the three of us. So we traipsed off to this little amusement park with rides, and they had literally opened it up early so Michael could go in there and not be bothered. So I took some pictures of Michael on this kind of Ferris wheel kind of ride with Bill sitting next to him, and I was in the front car.
Though he was still part of the family group, Michael's solo career aspirations soon started overtaking the work he did with the Jacksons.
His star would have shined anyway, ultimately. But remember, it was the Jackson 5 at first, and he came out of that situation because he literally distinguished himself.
It all starts with the record, Michael once told me. Everything, and he, pointed around and he said, Billy, this all starts with the record, so we gotta make this great.
In 1979, at the age of 20, Michael released Off the Wall, his first solo album for Epic. Fans heard a new, more mature Michael, with a deeper voice and more adventurous tracks. Off the Wall went on to sell 12 million copies worldwide. This record announced to the world the arrival of Michael Jackson, solo artist. He has been creating amazing songs ever since.
The best one is definitely Billie Jean.
Heartbreak Hotel.
Black or white?
It has to be I Wanna Rock With You.
Us song.
Of course I like I'll Be There. That's like my guy to girl song.
Smooth Criminal.
Heal the World, which was, of course, has become an anthem of songs.
Thriller.
Man in the Mirror.
Off the Wall marked the start of his hugely important working relationship with producer Quincy Jones. Quincy also produced Thriller, Bad, and was an integral influence on Michael's songwriting style.
Basically, every album, including a good part of Thriller, was done at our studios.
Michael has his own unique way of expressing his ideas for songs.
One of the things that he would sometimes do is he would record the demo for the song using only sounds that he would sing. He would beatbox the rhythm on track 1, and then he would go to track 2 and sing the bass line.
He, through all these years, he has worked with musicians necessarily because he doesn't play an instrument. And he's written entire records in his head and had to convey those to musicians. And he has a way of expressing a beat and a melody and a sound with just his body and his voice.
He would then musically sing the horn, the guitar, the strings. He would sing all the instrumentation because he would have all of the ideas in his head. He would know the arrangement. It was just a matter of getting all of these ideas onto tape, and then once they were onto tape and then the individual musicians would come in to do their overdubs, they could not only hear what their part would be, but they could hear in a bigger sense what the entire arrangement would be. After Michael would sing the individual musical elements, he would then sing his vocal arrangement over the top of that. This was a process that I would often do with Michael. And when the musician would come in, he would not only be able to hear what his part was, but he would be able to hear the song as a whole.
The fact that Michael doesn't play an instrument means he doesn't study an instrument, and it means that an instrument doesn't sort of sap his energy.
Though not technical, Michael has an affinity for technology and a deep understanding of how it can be manipulated.
But Michael has done something else. He makes wonderful music, and the instrument is the studio and the song and his voice and the whole sort of contextual process.
The fact that he wasn't a technologically oriented person actually fit into the philosophy of how we worked in the studio, because we would always make the technology follow what was required creatively. And Michael had great creative ideas.
And it works brilliantly.
Well, record one is, apart from being, technically almost beyond state of the art, there is equipment here that is built from scratch that exists in no other studio. The console that was in this room at the time that we did those records was built by us by hand, just one of a kind. And also our monitor systems are pretty stunning. And if you saw the one in the big room there, which we built for Michael, there's nothing like it anywhere. Which is why, now Dr. Dre and Eminem and all those clients love that room, because the sound from the loudspeakers is astonishing. And Michael does enjoy listening to it at fairly high levels. One time I went in, Michael, they had just finished a song, and Michael says, "You got to hear this." So I remember I went in and I sat down at the center of the console, and he turns to Bruce, who's the engineer, and says, "Okay, Bruce, hurt me." And there's a mark for that, the hurt me mark. And he turned it up to that, and they hit play, and I can't even tell you how loud it was.
Back in 1975, Sam Brown wrote One Day in Your Life for Michael and recalls that day recording in the studio.
And so the way Michael was working back then, he put the headphones on, he's in front of the mic, and he'd say, "Roll a tape." So we'd roll a tape with a demo singer singing it, and he'd listen to the first 8 bars, and he'd be sitting there, and he's listening, and he says, "Go back," and listens again, "Go back," and listens again, and he says, "Okay, I'm ready." And he starts to sing. And what was interesting, the first thing I noticed is that he has a phenomenal ear, because he was taking the phrasing, which singers don't normally do, of the demo singer, and singing the phrasing precisely the way they sang it. And so he did the first 8 bars. And so he said, "How'd that sound?" And I said, "That sounded great. That's right on the money." He says, "Okay, now let me sing it my way." So then he starts to sing it in a totally different phrasing, just like that. He had copped the phrasing of the demo singer off the tape, and now he's adding Michael Jackson to it. And I was like, "Oh, this is phenomenal."
He's just so good that pretty much you have it in a relatively few amount of takes. And when we did We Are the World, Michael pretty much sang his live parts down in one pass.
So it was no great surprise when Off the Wall was beaten by Michael's next solo album in 1982.
I was in the studio working with Quincy. We were working on subsequent albums, when in fact the Thriller album was climbing up the charts and the singles were becoming #1, one after another, single after single. And I remember the day Quincy walked into the studio and he said, "The Thriller album has gone platinum in LA."
I need your love, I need your love, I need your love, girl.
I think someone said the word holistic. I think he does think of the whole picture of what he's doing when he does stuff.
Michael's creative expression doesn't end with the songs. He is, of course, most often remembered for pioneering the music video.
Thriller broke ground, the first time music videos became something like a short film.
Michael was certainly one of the pioneers in the entire music video field.
In his own way, one of the vanguard pioneers of the form from Thriller on, and has always understood the impact of them.
Thriller. After I seen that video, we had like $5. We went to the ice cream truck and they had these little fake chains with the fists. It was like a little limestone glove. We was walking around with limestone necklaces on.
At approximately the same time that we were doing the Bad album, we also were working on the Captain EO movie, which was a 3D attraction at the Disney theme parks. Michael did some really good music, and I know they had a lot of interesting time shooting the dance scenes.
With so much on his plate, what was he like on set? Smith Words, now a choreographer, remembers the days when she danced with Michael.
We had a very long rehearsal period. I think we probably rehearsed for 6 weeks, which is unheard of in the video world. And it was pretty uncomfortable. Francis Ford Coppola directed it. And I believe George Lucas was actually producing it. Because we were in 3D, we had 3D lighting, so it was extra hot. It was triple the lighting. We were in rubber suits, rubberized jumpsuits, in 3D lighting, and with all the steam. And Michael was great. He was just funny, goofy, hardworking. He danced as hard as any of us.
Creative and inspired as ever, Michael continued to make amazing videos, including Smooth Criminal, shot and released in 1988.
Michael decided that there was going to be an entire improv section. He heard it musically, I think is what happened. And there's a chant that starts happening. Annie, are you okay? Are you okay, Annie? Annie, are you okay? And we went into silence, and then Michael just started screaming. And said, we were instructed by the director and by the choreographer and by Michael to just do what you feel. And you see legs flying. In fact, I know there was one shot where I start off that thing. Wait a minute, it starts on me. There's a little cat that walks across the piano, and then you see glass break, and then you see I did this big arch, and then I did a thing with my leg, and that's the beginning of that section. And then you start hearing moans, and Michael starts screaming, and it's really kind of eerie. And then Michael goes into a chant, Annie, are you okay? And then we were all asked to chant along with, so we all started chanting, and then it breaks back into a proper choreographic section, which was the entire company dancing together, including Michael.
In 1995, Nick Brandt conceived of and directed the incredible Earth Song video.
The most interesting time for me was on Earth Song, when I had a bunch of very cynical, jaded New Yorkers for crew for the part of the shoot that he was there, and they were just, oh yeah, Michael Jackson, da 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 da. But then when he started singing at the end of that song, and he's just screaming out the vocals, you could just see, you just look around, and everybody had stopped in their tracks and was watching him riveted. And he would only give me like one take from each angle because he was being blasted by, you know, these wind machines, and stuff was flying in his eyes, and just, I mean, it was really hard. I mean, we're just firing dust and leaves and all manner of stuff into his face. And everybody was just electrified. And he completely turned everybody around.
Through the success of Thriller, I think Michael became aware of exactly the power that he had and the influence that not only music could have, but his music could have in the world. And many of the themes in some of the later projects were very much a reflection of what Michael's concerns are for the world, for people, for children.
This is the area that might mean the most to Michael, but sadly where his words and actions are received most cynically.
So, for the victims of the Washington, D.C. 9/11 attacks on America, the fact that I got to create something that was the background video was all the flags of the world, and they flashed on the screen in time to the music. And it looked beautiful, and you know, Michael did this song, took his name out of the show, It never appeared in the performance or in the broadcast, and he rehearsed it and made it all perfect, and everybody worked really hard singing it. And I just think that man has a spirit and a soul that is just so strong. I really respect him.
Michael's a giver. He gives time, he gives money. He hears about kids that need surgery or operations, and he has his people call up and find out how much it will cost, and he writes a check, and nobody knows where it ever comes from.
Over the years, Michael has increasingly expressed his principles through his art. As well as being a fantastic visual feat, the video for Earth Song was honoured at the Genesis Environmental Awards.
Everybody is, kind of the idea is literally clinging on for dear life as the Earth resurrects itself, and the Earth is spinning, and there's this almighty, you know, incredible epic wind, and everybody's clinging on. He's a fantastic performer. And even though all those non-actors were brilliant, we didn't have anything for them. If I had had trees for them to hold on to, I would have done the same with them. But what happened was that, so by the time you got the people who were already prejudiced about Michael watched that video and thought, oh, there's Michael Jackson trying to save the world again. And actually, it was, if you watch the video in an unbiased light, it's everybody is trying to save the world, and everybody's just clinging on. But because A, he's the singer, B, he's a better performer, and C, he's got two trees to hold on to, he comes across as, to some, you could argue, you could interpret as, he's trying to save the world.
I don't think Michael is cynical. I think he just is a caring person. I think he really has an evolved sense to him. And I think he's, you know, I think he's done his share of marketing kudos and smart things. But I think underneath it all, he's just he's a true artist, in my opinion.
Then at the Brits Awards, he repeated that kind of motif, which could be interpreted as Jesus-like, Jesus on the cross, which is a dangerous thing to do. And I don't think he thought about that. And you could call that naive or not. I certainly never thought of it when we were shooting it. I don't know, nobody really did. But suddenly, and that we were naive as the filmmakers, I don't know. But suddenly, in the context of the Brits Awards, it became a dangerously, you know, pseudo-Christ-like thing to do. And so then that got, forever after, in the British context, the video got tainted by that, which is a shame because the message is so, you know.
In 1994, Michael married Lisa Marie Presley. She supported his work on good causes, and together they hosted a conference on diversity at Michael's Neverland Ranch, which has been his home since 1988.
He cares about life and existence, and he's trying to help people because he's in a position to.
It's impossible to pinpoint where Michael's music ends and his dance begins.
We would, I think I told you that we would be in rehearsals, and as you entered, everybody would be offered earplugs, including the dancers. And because the music was so loud that it would rock the floor. And that was because Michael wanted to feel the soul of the music.
Yes, I have heard he was a big fan of Fred Astaire and James Brown, and he's a very observant person, but yes, his dance is very effortlessly executed.
If you watch him carefully, you'll see that other than when he's doing more kind of street dancing type stuff, there's nothing technical about what he's doing, and he's brilliant. Every dancer moves when they watch Michael move. He makes everybody who can't dance feel the dancer in themselves. Because it comes from a heart and soul. He just has the soul of a dancer.
And perhaps Michael's most famous trademark is his moonwalk.
Now, I've heard he was inspired by a little kid in New York, but she just embellished and perfected it, and he did it just so flawlessly that it looks like it's defying gravity, and people just think, wow, and people start imitating, and people have no idea how to imitate.
And I spent like 2 days trying to figure out how to moonwalk.
Everything is just very flowing, and he just looks like a boneless person.
One of Michael's best friends believes there is plenty more that can be done with the moonwalk.
I'd like him to do the moonwalk on the moon. As a matter of fact, I'm talking to very high officials at a certain space agency in the United States. And they're taking it very seriously, because Michael once asked me, hey Uri, can you get me to the moon? He wasn't joking when he said that. And I sort of laughed at him, and I said to him, well, that's a great joke. He said, no, I'm serious. And then I said, well, I better check it out. And I called my friend, an astronaut, Edgar Mitchell, who was the sixth man to walk on the moon. And he said, look, Uri, why don't you call this and this number? And I did, and I could not believe the emails that I got from these people who said, look, the only thing that keeps Michael away from the moon now is time. We're talking about 11, 12 years from now, and money.
I mean, he went from being in the midst of all these trained school dancers, looking fabulous, to, you know, taking the spotlight in front of all these street dancers, who really, I think he learned his stuff from them just like he learned his stuff from us.
Michael can be credited with bringing street dance into the mainstream. He would hire street dancers to teach him moves and perform with him.
I spent all those years training, and I would watch some of these guys. And Michael started to be able to do it all too, just like that. He was like pop locking and all this stuff. It was like, what are you gonna do that?
And watching Mike on stage, the way he dances, he's the one that inspired me to break dance.
He seems to be on a constant quest for inspiration.
A side of Michael that is little known is his business savvy. This is a man who knows what he wants, knows how to get it, and knows exactly who can help get him there.
He chooses to run an organization making a record of musicians, engineers, producers, writers. These are some flaky people. And he finds a way to motivate them, organize them, make them compete with one another. I mean, you would have thought he had read management books. He did have wonderful skills at managing all this chaos going on. And it's music, it is chaos.
The professional side of Michael is highly professional. When he is working, I mean, you can cut the air in the studio with a knife. It's so concentrated and he's so focused. It's just amazing to see him. It's like another Michael Jackson.
In retrospect, there was the greatest feeling that the success of Thriller was probably justified, because the feeling in the studio was just, we are a team of people, we're going to make the absolute best record possible. And Quincy's phrase of, you leave your ego at the door, was one of those that we understood without ever having to say, because everyone was committed, everyone was giving 110%. Everyone knew it was going to be a great record. Everyone just didn't realize it was going to be the historic album that it became.
His family still remains important, and in 1984 Michael was persuaded to reunite with his brothers for the Victory Tour and album. Michael's little sister Janet had also signed a record deal, her big break coming in 1986 with the album Control. Michael knows how to give people space to work and create an exciting work environment.
he was making the Bad album at the time, and he would have me go to his house in Encino, where he had a really nice recording studio, and work on demos with him. He'd show up pretty much every day, unless he went out of town. He was well conscious of the, I wouldn't call it pressure, because I don't think, he never showed to me that he felt pressure, but he was just burning with ambition, and he wanted to beat whatever the last album did. He always wanted to beat it.
We did Smooth Criminal, and every day at lunch, the entire cast of dancers was invited to dailies. And dailies are the rushes where you get to go and see all the footage from the day before. It's unheard of. You don't allow the producers rarely allow any performer into the rushes or into the dailies. And Michael just made sure that we got that kind of reward for our work. That it was a really nice gift. It was a really nice gift, and I've never received that anywhere else.
One time I recall, I'll tell you a quick story. He sang something on one of the songs that I wrote called You Are There, which comes out on compilation. And he sang it in a way which I didn't particularly care for. He added something to it. And I said, Michael, let's do that take again. And he said, oh, Sam, that was great. And I said, I didn't like it. Can you do it more this way? And Michael said, okay, but you're not going to like it. And he did it the way I asked him to do it, and he did it exactly the way I asked him to do it. And in the studio, I thought it was great. I got home and I listened to the two versions, and I went, damn, he's right. I like his version better. So I called him on the phone and I said, Michael, you were right. Your version is better. I like your take on it better. And all he said was, told you so. That sums it up for someone who's of that stature. He would do it anyway. If you asked him to do it, he would do it. And he'd do it to the best of his abilities, in the confidence and certainty you would like what he did, ultimately at the end.
Michael has consistently managed to pick the right people to contribute to his projects.
And Michael, of course, is always, he's got this radar on, scanning, trying to figure out who you are, and you know if you're jive or BSing, and if you really know your craft, and so he was sizing me up.
I think one of the great things about Michael and his success has been those teams of people that he's worked with. Of course, on Thriller, that team of people was brought together by Quincy. Much later, I think Michael followed that same lesson, that same pattern, in that he wanted the team of people that he worked with to be the very best. If it was a great composer like Elmer Bernstein, then that's who he wanted. If it was a great programmer or musician, a guitarist, whatever it would be, Michael would want the very best, because he would know this is the person that's really going to take the bar and push it up even higher.
Well, yeah, but also he's relying on, I mean, like, Billy Buttrell and Bruce Woodine were both excellent engineers, and they make great sounding records. And so when you have people that are that good, then generally speaking, you don't feel so bad, because you can feel fairly secure that they are going to do their best work, and Michael knows that. And so when he walks in and he hears it, usually it's pretty darn good.
But make no mistake, Michael is, and always has been, very much in charge.
I believe Michael always had the final decision. Very quietly and very gently and behind closed doors.
On stage, Michael is the boss. I mean, backstage, he's the boss, but you don't know it. Whatever Michael wanted, for the most part, Michael got. He'd go to me or Joe. If there was like an employee or someone in the crew that was causing a problem or doing drugs or something like that, Michael would come to one of us and he would say, I think so-and-so's doing drugs. And that's all he would say. And then Joseph and I would deal with it.
Dichotomy that every musician has to face, you know, keeping the music pure versus having some sort of way of presenting it to people, and that requires organizational skills. And Michael has them. And he's at the head of that pyramid. There's nobody else.
After the huge success of the Bad album, Michael moved on to his next big project.
So the next thing that came around was actually the Dangerous album. And we started the Dangerous album. Originally that was going to be some type of compilation disc. And as Michael had just too many very exciting songs, it finally evolved into what became the Dangerous album, which was all new material. Probably the biggest hits from that album was, of course, the Black or White, which had a really exciting music video, which again brought John Landis back to work with Michael.
The Black or White video saw the use of morphing for the first time. Smith Words choreographed the morphing sequence.
So I needed to create something that had the sense of music and rhythm, that as we changed, John Landis had something to cut back to morph, and that it had continuity. So I had to teach them a little thing that was just from here up.
He was still creating and inspiring as much as ever, but one crucial variable had changed. His partnership with Quincy Jones had come to an end.
Losing Quincy was a tough call because Quincy's so good at that. He's really good at, when they've reached it, moving on. You know, and it's great to have an artist, to have someone like that who can really keep things moving efficiently and know that the best performance has been delivered and there's no reason to go any further.
Oh yeah, I mean, we giggle and laugh like crazy.
And Michael likes to have fun and play. I told you that.
He's, you know, very entertaining.
It was very funny. We had a nice time.
It was just a blast.
A lot of fun.
I enjoyed every minute of it.
I want to look into your eyes and see forever.
Well, you know, also you have to understand, of course, obviously, it's all been talked about. Michael certainly didn't really have a conventional childhood, and Michael does love, just like he'd be happy to play checkers on the floor and just have fun and play electronic games, and, you know, he's sort of being a kid because he missed it.
When you ask Michael Jackson about his childhood, there are no secrets. He said, oh, I had an awful childhood. He says that openly. I've seen him with his dad. You know, after the show at Madison Square Garden, we went to a garden party in Central Park, and it was just an amazing scene to see him with his dad, the person that he supposedly who was so bad to him, but he forgave him. He said, I forgive you.
It makes total sense that Michael is most at ease hanging out with kids.
For the most part, most adults want something from you. Can you do something for me? Can you contribute to this charity? And sometimes the charity is them. And I realized early on that that was the primary reason that Michael liked to hang out with kids, because they have no agenda other than to just hang out and have fun. And he could let his guard down. That's the one time I saw Michael, and that radar I told you about earlier, that's always on, it was off, is when he was around kids. Because they're so sincere and they're very real and they really have no agenda.
When Smith Words visited the set during the black or white shoot, she took her daughter with her.
She had such a good time with Michael. And they watched The Little Mermaid and tried on a box full of wigs, crazy wigs that he had, and ate enough candy that by the time she got home, she was sick to her stomach. He just kind of offered her like a little fantasy land.
But playing practical jokes is what he does best, and this runs in the family.
Love a good prank and schoolboy pranks. The more schoolboyish, the better.
There was the time that Michael playing a joke on me. I was sitting at the console mixing, and he came up and put a tarantula on my arm as a joke.
Michael had finished his macrobiotic diet and had lost several pounds. And he said he was going to go on a fast to lose the last 2 or 3 pounds for a week. And he made some comment like, Sam, you can probably fast for a few days yourself. And I said, you know what, Michael? If you fast for a week, I'll fast for a week. And we bet $100, Mike. Then the other boys said, I want a piece of that. So there was like $500, $600 on the table that I could not go from Sunday to Sunday without eating any food whatsoever.
During the Thriller album, he'd bring Muscles to the studio, and Muscles was a blonde boa constrictor, and Muscles would crawl across the recording console and then turn around and crawl back across the console and make his way through the wires and everything. That was memorable because Quincy didn't really like snakes very well. So Quincy and the snake never got along.
Saturday, we were like one day out, away from the completion of the week. And we're on the bus, and Michael was supposed to be fasting, but the bus is dark on the inside at night when we were driving, and I noticed the refrigerator door opening, and I saw that it was Michael. And Michael was going in this little tin foil and taking a bite of chicken out. And I said, that's a little bit cheeky. He's cheating on the diet. So I went and got my camera. And I laid there and I waited and I waited and I waited. Sure enough, about an hour or so later, Michael got up again, went back to the refrigerator, opened it up, opened up the tin foil for some chicken, took a bite, and I got him with the camera. So the picture came out where he's like sleepy and he's got his mouth full of chicken. But he got me back, or he tried to get me back.
There'd be the times that Bubbles would come to the studio when Bubbles was just a very young little chimpanzee. He was so much fun to hold. It was like, you know, having a little energetic kid. He was real cute, and he just loved to, you know, be held. And then Bubbles got a little bit older. He got more mischievous. He would always get into trouble with something. He'd love to play with equipment and push faders or do something. So there was a lot of fun times, and a lot of memorable things.
We were at a hotel in Hartford, Connecticut, and there's a knock at my door, and I open the door, and there are like 8 bus boys or waiters in these white coats, and each one of them has a tray filled with food, wheeling it into my room. All this food. Must have been everything that was on the menu. And by sheer coincidence, Michael's door opens with this food being paraded in, and he says, "Hey fellas, Sam's cheating. Look at all the food he's ordered. He's been sneaking food." But he fessed up, but it was quite funny.
One time he walked in, he drove in some beat-up old van. Personally, he drove in, and he had, like, you know, the dark glasses with a phony nose. And he says, "How do I look? You know, this is my disguise for today." He's been so hounded that when he's free, not to be hounded. And even when I've seen him doing interviews, he's a different person than he is when he's not. He's more, it's a different Michael.
And now Michael has his own children, to whom he is completely devoted.
Such a good father today because he's giving back to his kids what he never had. And the kids are fantastic kids. They're highly intelligent, and they have everything that other kids have. But remember, he's a celebrity. He's the most famous person in the world. You know, any child that grows up in a household that the father or the mother are celebrities do have unusual lives, for goodness sake.
After the Dangerous album was the History album. And History was a little bit different nature of a project. Part of that was because on the day we were scheduled to go in the studio and begin the process, LA was struck by the earthquake.
We had just completed Studio A, had redone it for them to start a new album, and it was I think it was Earthquake Monday was start date for the album. So I got a call from Michael and Bruce saying, you know, it's too shaky, we're going to New York. So we had just spent millions of dollars getting a room all set for them, which they were going to start that Monday for an unopened booking, and they said they were going to New York.
LA was still suffering aftershocks, and a lot of people were on edge in town. It wasn't as conducive to be creative.
So I got a call, you know, it was 6 months later saying, it's too damn cold to do vocals in New York, we're coming back. And so they spent another year here finishing the record.
Again, that was an album that was partially a compilation of greatest hits, and a second disc which was entirely new material.
Aside from the shrewd professional decisions, everyone who works with Michael is overwhelmingly impressed by his focus, his work ethic, and his amazing talent.
It's really extraordinary, but it's almost like his work was play, even in his position.
Michael worked 10 times harder than anybody.
I've done 400 or 500 albums. You know, being with Michael is as exciting, you know, on a musical level as any person I've ever worked with. And he's sort of like Robin Williams, he's always on.
He was the most instinctive, is the most instinctive musician I've ever met, the most talented.
I've never worked with anyone more committed, more focused, more in tune with the music.
In all my connections to him, where I was in the same room when rehearsal was happening for a concert or anything, he is so focused.
But I'm telling you, standing next to Michael when he's performing, it's an amazing experience.
I've never seen anything like it on any artist anywhere.
As I think back to all the musicians I've done music videos for, I cannot think of anybody that has had that electrifying a presence when they kick in.
Michael could stand and talk to you, and you'd think he wasn't paying attention to you because he's working out moves while he's talking to you and doing spins and you know. And you're talking to him about, okay, Mike, we got to get to the limo at 5:15, and we, you know, the sound check's at 7. Michael, are you paying attention? Yeah, I hear you. 5:15 limo, and he's constantly thinking about what he's going to be doing or creating things in his head all the time.
Aside from the shrewd professional decisions, everyone who works with Michael is overwhelmingly impressed by his focus, his work ethic, and his amazing talent.
You see, Michael doesn't boast. He doesn't come out with his achievements. That's where I find the humble Michael Jackson, what people don't really know.
he's like in Stranger in Moscow. He was drenched. You know, we're shooting at 360 frames a second or 1,000 frames a second, and to see the rain at that speed, it's bucketing down. I mean, it's like rain bar after rain bar after rain bar with big specially designed holes to make these drops of rain. So, you know, you do a 10-second shot and he's drenched. I mean, you know, we worried obviously just makeup was going to just come flying off and everything, and he just went with it.
A frenzy still accompanies him wherever he goes, including the time when Michael became an honorary director of Uri Geller's English football club.
Michael was almost killed in Paddington Station, I can tell you that very openly. We were just, I mean, pressed to the train and almost fell under the wheels of the train in Paddington Station when I took Michael Jackson to my football club, Exeter City Football Club, where he agreed to be a director, an honorary director of the football club. There were thousands and thousands of fans that simply crushed us onto the train. And Michael was pushed down onto the pavement, and we got to our train and he pushed himself into the compartment and he fell into the couch there. It was a first class kind of we rented a special train for Michael. And that was a moment when I thought he's going to look at me and say, Uri Geller, take me to the hotel. I don't ever want to hear about you again. And I was waiting for him to say that, and he looked at me and he said, hey Uri, I'm okay, relax, don't worry about me. I love those fans.
The talent and creativity remain as strong as ever. But after such intense media attention for so long, staying focused gets harder and harder.
That's true. Clearly he was much more focused at the time of Thriller. He would have this place booked for long periods of time, and he'd be off shooting videos of this, and this place would be here for 2 weeks with all the people here, musicians, producers, and everything, and Michael would never show up. You know, with all the conflicts with the record label and all the various issues that he's dealing with, I'd say it'd be awfully hard to concentrate and put out your best effort on an album right now.
Well, he seems to be so busy fighting everything instead of just doing his work.
I mean, Michael's just, obviously, he grew into a phenomenal songwriter, apart from being an amazing artist. And he's had a lot of, you know, good people around him for a lot of years. As I say, the issue now is more that I think Michael could certainly come back and do as good a record as he's ever done. He hasn't lost anything, talent-wise. He's just as great as he's always been. It's just a question of centering.
I need your love, girl.
I definitely think Michael created certain styles that people take for granted.
I guess you might say that Michael laid the foundation for what evolved into the current type of urban and hip-hop music.
The way the records are put together now, the use of the way background vocals are stacked, the way the rhythm track is put together, built piece by piece, the way the lead works against the backgrounds and the track. It was all innovated by Michael.
But as far as being able to compete with standards now, it's going to be a little bit different because the standards aren't the same. Back then it was based on talent, now it's based on production, basically. How good is your beat?
He has the ability to cross over into so many areas of music. Of course, he comes from an R&B background, but the pop, the rock, all of the influences are there.
So, I mean, as far as his last album, Invincible, I feel like that can compete with what goes on now because, you know, with time you have to evolve and step up to handle the new competition that's going on. But as far as talent, just raw talent, any of these guys out here, I think he can still blow them out the water easily without no issues.
Michael Jackson has already created a powerful legacy for himself, and is not finished yet.
I think a lot of this other stuff will just go away over time because it's not really relevant to what he did musically. And then I'm sure that his albums will be played, 25 years from now. The cuts from any number of his records that are great are still great, and they will be great. And all this other stuff will just go away.
Michael will go down in history known for the great music that he's done, the great songs that he's written, the influence that he's had on how people perceive music in a visual context through the entire music video format.
The audience has always known Michael was sincere and real.
He's had music that's been the most energetic, dance-oriented style, and at the same time he's done music that's been the most personal and touching. So, excuse me.
He created a whole scene of dance that didn't exist before.
I think it starts with the songs still, which would touch people in any decade.
And he's done it all over the world.
He's a mystifier. That's the right word for him. Michael is a mystifier. And as long as you're controversial, people will never forget you.
So I would hope his legacy would be that he brought soul to the commercial world.
Michael sounds like Michael. His records I can't compare them to anything else because they really are unique. I mean, when you talk about Off the Wall and Thriller, I think that they are standards. That's, what can you say?